Once you learn and master this shadow rule, your designs will go from looking like this into this. Now, to master this shadow technique, you have to first understand how light works in our physical world. I want you to look here, and this is a picture. And if I asked you where the light actually came from in this picture, you would come to the conclusion, and I hope you do, somewhere around here is how the light is coming from, right? So it is actually coming from up and above, and this is the first key thing you have to learn. The light comes from the sky. It doesn't come from below, it comes from up. That's the first thing. The second thing you really have to learn and understand is when we see a shadow, let's say on a object. So I'm gonna actually throw two frames here, and the first one I'm gonna copy the color of this grass thingy, and the second one I'm gonna copy is this shadow part. It is important to note that the dark shadow object isn't just, let's say, darker than the first color, this brownish looking color, but it is close to that brown color. It is not just a dark color like black, it is dark brown. If it was red, it would be dark red. So the darkness, the shadow that comes to the element actually changes its color according to what the color of the element was initially. The third thing that really matters here is that where the light comes, it actually makes the also object brighter. So if, let's say, you put light on this chair, it is actually becoming much more like whiter instead of if it hadn't have any kind of light on top of it in the first place. So it is actually becoming much more like, so because the light is coming from up here, this part of the, let's say, thing is much more lit than this part of the chair, and that is because the closer you are to the light, the more bright the color of the object will become. Now let's see how this knowledge will help us actually design our drop shadows. I want you to look at this screen. Now, the background of this kind of screen is actually closest to what most applications will have. So if you are looking, let's say these are our objects and they are very close to, let's say, this light gray white look. Now, here is the thing. For us to add a shadow to this kind of element, what we need to do is we have to, just like we talked about in object here, the shadow must be just a darker variation of the color of the object, and in this case closer to white. So what we need to do here is we just need to actually change the shadow of color. So let's say we match the color of the actual object, and I'm clicking on that color and I'm just gonna change it. Let's say I'm gonna give it some 5 saturation, and I'm gonna get it, let's say, around 90 here, and that kind of moving 5 to darker place, going around bottom axis here on the HSP color scale, is the first step where we establish a darker shade for the shadow than the object color. The second part is we want to make sure, let's say we have 0y, 0x, we want to make sure that we are going to be only working with the y, which is for beginners. You can do x and y because the light is coming from the top, right? So the shadow will be at the bottom of the object if it's coming from the top. If you are working like 135 degrees here, it will be much more not just the bottom but also the right side. But for the sake of this technique, we are just going to be working for the 90-degree shadow. So that would be, let's say, 16, I say. And now you also have to observe we have the shadow kind of right, but just so you can observe, the blur is the double of the y value right now, which is where the rule of 2 comes in. And I reduce the spread, and you can add spread later on, let's say -4, to take it from the edges of the shadow if they are too strong. But for the sake of this exercise, let's keep them at 0, and that is already looking better. And if you, let's say, reduce your blur, the problem you are going to have, and we can even put this a bit darker here, so maybe 93 and let's say 4 or 2, yeah, so around 94, 95, where we have just reduced the brightness 5 more, and then we played around with the S saturation 5, around 5 plus 5 to minus 5. It is around +1 for us, and that is kind of looking good. Now I want to show the next example. If the background color of the screen changes to green, the shadow color matters a lot more if we were to just use white, because this is the crucial point where the object color must match kind of the background color or have the hint of the color, because otherwise it looks very odd. For example, I could add a shadow to this object. Let's say I can add a red shadow, and that looks weird. That doesn't look like a shadow, that just looks light. Because so what we need to do is we need to match the shadow of the object to the background here as well. So we would just copy the background color, sorry, my mistake. We would copy the background color, let's say here, and then what we can do is we can play with the color, let's say 5 plus 5, so let's say 14, and we can just say 92, so that should be around, or maybe we can even go, let's say 19, we can keep the color the same, and then when you look at it, you are like, ah, that is better, so that did become a better shadow. And one thing you can do here is you can just go down here more if you want to. Maybe we started with we could even stay at 19 here. I think 19 would be good, and that looks pretty good for the shadow part. So that is looking good, and again, double the blur, double the blur compared to the Y or X value, and the spread doesn't matter here as much. Now, one key caveat to this, when it comes to using actually a background that is way, let's say, darker, the rules kind of have to change a bit. So let's say we make this background a lot more darker. The problem we will have here is let's say we match the shadow color to the background here. The problem is we won't get away much with if we just do it 5%. It is not enough because the background is already dark, so the shadow has to be extra so that it actually gives that 3D look. So we gotta play with a lot more. So we gotta drag the color here a lot deeper in the HSP scale here, more than +5, -5, so that it actually looks like a 3D object. That is one caveat to this approach, and that is kind of how this rule works. For beginner designers, this will solve most of your shadow problems, and it will help you a lot when it comes to designing better. And I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you enjoyed this video, you will love this video about getting better in color for UI design.